I'm so excited to teach you about double digging. To get started, you're going to mark out your bed. So as I've talked about, 4 feet is an ideal bed width, and then you make it as long as you need to. And so you're going to want to anchor some string lines. Those are going to make your nice straight edges. And then the first thing you're going to do is either on a tarp or some cardboard or in a couple of wheelbarrows, you are going to dig out a spit in the ground that's a minimum half the depth of your English garden spade. And the tools that you need for double digging are right here: an English garden fork or a digging fork and an English garden spade. And so I've already started this process. I've dug down so that my spade has dug out about a spade's depth. And I've dug out 1, 2, and a little more, about 2.5 wide on the spade. And I've got a nice rectangular box, and I've stockpiled all that soil here. I'm going to keep that soil covered because this might take me a couple of days. So that's just step 1, is finding some place to keep your first, what we call a spit of soil, secure. So the next phase in the double digging process is forking your spit. So you're now going to go in here with the digging fork, and you're going to slowly, depending on the quality of your soil, we've got hard red Carolina clay beneath my feet right here, so it's going to take a little bit of effort. But we're going to start. Sometimes you can only put your fork in just like an inch or 2 to start to break that up. And you want to work smart, not hard, so a lot of times I will lean my weight into the fork and move the fork around in circles and start to open it up maybe down to 3 inches or so, and flip the fork and crack the soil open and then break the clods up with the fork. Eventually, after a few passes, you'll be able to go into the soil all the way up to the depth of your fork in every inch of your spit. That's your goal. And that's where the term double digging comes from, is that you first dig the top layer and then you dig the second layer, but you aren't actually removing it or turning it. You're simply loosening it. So depending on your native soil, you may find that you have a lot of rocks. We certainly do here. So I usually make a pile of those, but you don't have to pull every rock out. So if you've got rocks that are on the small size, you can probably leave those behind. You just want to pull out the big ones. You're basically trying to build something that has coarse texture at the very, very base on up to the finest texture at the very, very top of your double dug bed. So our Dr. Don Wilson Community Garden intern, Ian, is helping me out here. It's just 3 hours later now. Just kidding. Maybe 5 minutes, but he's been working hard at this. We've been pulling out lots of rocks, and he's almost complete. And so you'll notice he's getting really close into the edge, because you want to make sure you maximize every square inch of your bed, because plants love edges. And so we want to make sure that we have double dug all the way up to the edges of our container, so to speak. And so at this point, Ian can pretty much place this fork anywhere in the spit and it will sink in pretty effortlessly. He's got it nice and loose all the way in there. Yeah, that is beautiful. So he can test it now. He's going to go around and see if there's any spots that might be a little firm down below. Check his edges. And your test is that you can put your fork in anywhere in the spit and it goes in pretty easily, and you've got nice, light, loose soil in the base of your spit. Another test is that your spit will have filled up about 50% because you've loosened the soil so much. So we're ready for the next part. Ian's done a beautiful job getting this bed, this spit tilt. We've got nice fine soil. He can plunge his fork all the way into the spit, all the way up to the hilt. This is the next phase. This is optional, but it's great if you're working in the fall, which is the best time to be double digging, is in the fall season, even ideally like sort of nearing fall equinox on into the winter. Is if you have a lot of weed material to clean up in your garden, this is a great place to put it. So we've got all this ragweed stalks right now that I'm going to put in here. And again, this is optional, but it really helps to quickly rapidly build soil fertility when you're double digging. I would not put finished compost in your spit. I would save that for the top layer. But if you've got a lot of green matter or brown, a combination of green and brown is awesome. That's preferable. But you just kind of put whatever you've got on in your garden. If it's nothing, then you put nothing in. But if you can put some green material in here, it's just going to improve because you're giving the soil microbes something to eat. So we'll fill up our spit. I've got a lot of stuff that's kind of a nice combination of carbon, woody stalks, and green. So it's going to help to lighten this heavy clay soil by adding some organic matter down below. So now we're ready for the next phase of double digging. In an ideal world, since this is a bed that we have grown on before, we grew oat straw here this spring. Last year we grew peppers in this bed. So it's been forked last season, so the top foot has been loosened, and we've never walked on it. So in an ideal world, I would have what's called a digging board. You can make one of these by just getting a 4x4 sheet of lightweight plywood and carve a handle out of the top of it so you can pick it up, and you would lay it down, and that would distribute your weight across this bed so you're not compacting the soil as you're double digging. I don't have one of those, so we're just going to go for it. The next phase is where the artistry of double digging comes in, because I am now going to move this next section. I'm going to create a new spit, but I'm going to do it by cutting slices or shards of soil and moving them on top of this spit. And I'm going to do that slice by slice by slice, because that way, eventually, as we get further down the bed, it allows us to keep the top on the top and the bottom on the bottom, thereby practicing our good, healthy soil principles. So we are violating a lot of healthy soil principles right now, right? Like we're disturbing the soil, but we're still trying to stay true to some of them, which is that we are keeping the bottom on the bottom, and we are going to keep the top on the top. And even as we move this soil, we're going to strive to keep even that utmost top inch of soil on the top layer as much as we can, as often as we can. So to begin, we're going to edge. So I'm going to, using my string line as my guide, I'm going to edge about 3 spades back, about 2.5, 3 at the most. You don't want to go wider than that because you're going to be having a hard time throwing those shards if the distance between the spit and where you're digging gets too wide. So I edge that, and then I begin, and it's a good idea to probably move any material that you have. So if you're starting from bare backyard garden, then the first thing you would do is clean that grass off of your spit or off of your bed. So you might go through with a hoe or with this digging spade, and you can literally skim the soil, and then you can stockpile that and save that, and that becomes what goes in your spit. You can put that grass or that thatch upside down in your spits, and that will break down and provide a lot of great nitrogen. And for us, I mean, we can just throw this oat straw cover crop, the debris left over from it, just right in our spit as we go, adding some carbon in here. These are mugwort vines. We're not going to put those in our spit. They're invasive. So we're just going to clear this up a bit. And then we're going to begin taking a slice at a time. And the first spit's always the hardest to work with. Ideally, you get into a rhythm where you're throwing it. But first, we have to build something to throw the shards against. So the first spit's always going to be a little messy. Our soil is also a little dry, so it's also going to be a little crumbly. Whenever you're double digging, you're paying attention to soil moisture. If your soil is really dry, you're going to take bigger slices or bigger pie shards, so to speak, on your spade. If your soil is really wet, you're going to take thinner slices, because if it's really wet and you take a big slice of it, when you throw it over here, it's not going to break apart. Ideally, once you toss it over here, it just kind of collapses and breaks apart. And I have a slight problem in this section. I've got an old piece of landscape fabric in my way. We're going to work with that or work around it. And then I get over to the other side. I do the same thing. I'm going to edge once, twice, and almost a third spade width. And I'm just gonna keep doing zigzagging back and forth across the bed, taking slice by slice. So now we've dug out a new spit and we've piled the soil up here on our first spit. And we're ready now to fork just like we did with that one. So our next phase will be forking this whole spit and then adding the green material. And then I'm going to show you how to add much more specifically slice by slice the shard to the next spit, because you're going to be able to see how it lands and this berm begins to hold the bed in place. So now we've forked the second spit. When you are forking the spit, it's really important that you make sure you get up underneath the last spit so that there isn't like sections in case your soil tumbles into the next spit. You could miss whole sections of forking the soil. So you want to make sure that you can put your fork in where your last spit was and that it goes in really effortlessly. And same thing, you want to make sure you get your edges really well. You know, even like taking your fork and kind of digging into them a little bit is really great. All right, so now we're on to digging our third spit. And this is where double digging actually gets enjoyable because you can get into a rhythm. We're gonna start slicing those shards of soil, and we're gonna be able to throw them against this berm that we've created here from our very first spit. So here I go, I'm gonna edge first. And mind you, if you're dealing with really heavy clay soil all the way up to, the top, you may not get to enjoy double digging. It just may be a labor of love because it is hard work if you don't have like easy light soil to work with. And even here we've got a lot of rocks, and so it does kind of interrupt that flow. But we'll see what we can do. So I'm gonna take some pretty big slices because, as I said, my soil is dry and light and fluffy on top. I'm gonna dig down. I'm gonna try and slide out a nice full slice, and then I'm gonna toss it. And then you can either do this right away or you can come back and do it, but you're gonna hit and strike and break open the soil, anything that didn't break open. Usually I wait and do that all at the end. So again, nice big slice because my soil's really dry, and I toss. And this is a really specific technique that can take a while to get. So again, I'm gonna slice down, try and find that chunk of soil on my spade, and flip and toss. And so what's happening is the top layer of soil is staying on the top, and then all the clay is staying in the middle and at the bottom. And this is tricky too, because like as I shoved my spade in there, all of my good soil fell away. So sometimes you have to really ease your spade into the soil to try to get it to stay on your shovel. Like so. And this flip technique, I'm right-handed, so I'm using my right foot to guide my spade into the soil. Then I'm gonna bend down low. I'm really sinking into my knees and my hips. I'm not bending over with my legs straight. I'm using my strength of my muscles to get down low. And then as I stand up, I'm tossing so that this hand comes up and over my shoulder, and this wrist is pressing forward and delivering the soil to the spit or to the berm that I'm building. So I'm going to go back the other way. First though, I'm going to edge. Going to get a slice of soil and toss it up there. And again, I'm hitting so many rocks in this bed, so it's a little tricky. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm going to go through, take out any invasive roots, any big rocks, and most of this fell open really nicely, so there's not a lot to break up. So I'm going to make a couple more passes because my goal is to cover the spit in front of me. I will also be cleaning out all the good soil from the basis that's fallen in and piling it on top of there as well. And as I'm throwing my pie shards of soil up there, I'm aiming to create some architecture so that the center is the highest point and the sides are a little bit lower. And in this instance, because we're on a slope, I'm actually probably going to build my bed so that it's level. So that I'm not like this with the slope, but in fact, I'm working against the slope slightly, creating a level bed architecture. So this front berm might be a little bit steeper in order to create a level spot. So double digging is really methodical. So each spit is going to be exactly the same width. Once you get to your third spit, you're really going to want to make sure that it's basically 2.5, no more than 3 spades wide. I'm on the short side, so 2.5 works really well for me. If you're a little taller, you could go a full 3 wide. But you want to be consistent because otherwise you will have a bed where you've got one section that's really high because you dug a really wide spit, and then that spit's really low because then you dug a narrower spit. And so you have to think about you're moving this soil to cover this much space. So you want to make sure that you're doing the same thing over and over again. We've dug our third spit, now we're ready to dig our fourth. Just a reminder, you always start by edging both sides. And if you need to, you can even have like a stake or a string or something that you stick in the ground at the edge so that you know that's the width of your spit. Because it gets hard to remember or know how far back you go. Sometimes your edging gets buried or hidden and so you can't see it. So for some people that's real helpful as they're getting started to make sure that their spit's the same length is to edge measure and put a stake in the ground. Want to reiterate that it's really important to pay attention to the soil moisture content. That's going to determine how thick your slices of soil are. Right now the soil is pretty dry here and crumbly, so I can take a pretty thick slice. And you can see there how the soil, the good soil at the top, the more fertile soil, and then the clay is at the bottom. And that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming that when we toss this slice onto the berm, 1, it breaks apart, and 2, the top stays in the top and the bottom stays in the bottom. Again, great example right there. You can see how the clay is at the base and the soil, loose and fertile soil, broke at the top. So Ian's going to take a practice run at trying his hand at throwing these shards up here. He's sometimes left-handed, sometimes right-handed, so that's also something he's going to be figuring out, and you also might need to figure that out, what feels right for you. Go for it. So he's got his foot stepping down gently. He's going to start to slide that spade. Yeah, he's angling it back to try and catch that shard. Now he's going to attempt the toss. Pretty good. It happens. Yeah, just keep going down and we'll clean that out. So if that happens to you, you lose the shard, it falls into your spit, no big deal. You'll just shovel all that out at the end. And so notice how Ian just tossed that on the pile here. Remember, you're aiming to throw it up against your wall like he just did on that one. You don't want to just you don't ever want to build your pile top to bottom. You want to build it front to back. So you're putting slice by slice by slice by slice, slice by slice by slice by slice, filling it front to back. Great. Okay, so here's a few details for you. You probably aren't going to finish your double dug bed all in one day. Like about this much can take the average person an hour or so. About 7 feet is a good average. 7 by 4 is about how much you probably can accomplish in an hour learning to double dig. So how do you leave it so that you can come back the next day or the next week when you have a chance to keep working on it? I generally like to leave it with a spit, open, forked, and full of green matter. And then that's it. So we've got what we've dug, we've got our spit, and I know Ian just dug this, but ideally if we were leaving this for the day and we're gonna come back to it later, we would not have started digging again, okay? You wanna leave it with just a closed spit full of green matter, ideally. Let's say you look at the forecast and it's gonna be raining a lot of rainfall. You would also wanna tarp where you're gonna dig. You wanna protect that. This area can stay uncovered, but let's say it's going to be really, really dry for the next few days. Then you're going to want to actually come out here and water this. And you can even, while you're double digging, if the day is bright or warm, keep a hose where you're double digging and keep watering this. And every time you build a spit, it's a great idea to even water all the green and brown matter in the spit so that you're getting soil moisture deep in the bed. And microorganisms need that soil moisture. So not only do they need the oxygen that you're providing by digging this bed up, but they also going to need some moisture in there to help the breakdown process. Finally, before you leave for the day, you want to make sure that you've gone through and you've broken up any clods. Our soil is nice and loose here that we're working with, so it's not too bad. But the final stage is called tilthing, and that's where you come with a fork or a spade and you go through and you make sure that the whole bed is nice and broken up, because sometimes your shards won't break apart when you throw them. Maybe you've got really heavy clay soil, or maybe it's a really wet soil. So you've got to come through and break and break and break it up. You can do it by hitting it. You can do it by chopping into it like I'm doing here. You can also use your fork for this job. You can, fork in here. You can also use the fork to just pound, lightly tapping at the soil to break it up, because you do not want to leave any large clods at the surface or even inside, because they're going to harden and you're going to really ruin your soil architecture. So this is a really important step. And I will often, just so that I'm using my body in different ways, I will do this as part of my flow. So I will dig a spit, fill it, fork it, fill it, and before I dig the next spit, I'll come and tilt a little bit, because this is a different way of using my body than any of the other ways I'm using it in the double digging process. So you can really work for a good while, an hour or two, because you're using all different ways of moving. You don't get sore as much as if you just kept to the same repetitive motion.